So, all right, so we're down to port scanning. By the way, here's a fun utility to know about. This used to be free, but it's not free anymore, but it's a floppy disk. And if you put it in a floppy drive, although it must have a USB version or something now because machines don't have floppy drives anymore, and boot from it, it then patches the RAM contents of the Windows operating system when it first boots up, so you can log into any account with any password. And the cool thing about this is you get in someone else's account and everything you do is logged as their action, and there's no record of this happening. So this is even more fun than the thing you do. A couple of these projects get you past Windows passwords, but the most common way to get past Windows passwords is to alter the SAM file, which is the Security Accounts Manager on the Windows operating system, to change the password for an account or create a new account. And those work to get into a Windows system, but they leave traces behind. Now there's a new account or a password change, which someone might notice. This, I don't think, leaves any clue at all. Somebody's in your account as if it was the right, because they just go in RAM where it compares, is the password equal to this? They just skip that step. Accept any password. Yeah?
How can they do that if Windows loads after the system is...
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure how it works. They must put something in RAM that persists as they launch Windows. Yeah?
What's the cost?
I don't know what it is. I only use the free version. But if you Google it, it's out there. Yeah, but it's a pretty cool idea. It's one of the more powerful hacking tools. Yeah?
Does it run kind of like a rootkit?
Yeah. It's kind of like a one-use rootkit. Yeah. It's changing the boot process to boot in a strange way, which is, all right. And the way we did it here was with the Ultimate Boot CD. That's
$15, Professor.
$15?
Yeah.
That's not bad, yeah. Anyway, the Ultimate Boot CD will, but I don't really care about hiding my traces. When I'm getting in a system, I'm content to actually change a password or something. But yeah, it's certainly good to know that such a thing exists. So if you go in the log and find that somebody did something, you don't really know it was that person doing it. Not with all that high degree of security. This is why you should have something like two-factor authentication. Anyway, by the way, some two-factor systems are actually very bad. Microsoft and Apple both had a USB-connected thumbprint reader, which worked by scanning your thumbprint, and if you matched your thumbprint, it would then type in your password for you. So this made you much less secure because passwords are stored in a hashed form. Your actual password is not stored on the system, but the thumbprint reader software has to have a plain text version of your password to type it in. So they lowered the security of the overall system back to MS-DOS, back when passwords were stored in plain text. This is one of those products that never should have made it out of the design phase. If there was a security audit at the first step of design, they'd notice the fundamental way this product works is stupid, and we should not do it. But anyway, so we'll talk about port scanning and a few tools, and talk about scripting, which is how you really get into things. So the point of port scanning is just like going up to an apartment house and ringing all the doorbells to see who's home, or to trick somebody into opening the door. You usually only think of TCP ports. Almost most services that are interesting run over TCP. There are a few that run over UDP, but most of them run over TCP, and TCP has this handshake. So if you send a SYN, the system will send a SYN-ACK back if it's listening on that port. And that means there's some kind of service here, like a web server, or an email server, or a telnet server, and that's what you want. First you find out what servers exist, and those are your possible ways in. There was a guy last week that he's a real estate agent in Utah, and he's also advertising to just do random odd jobs for money. He seems to be going broke, so he decided to declare himself a security company and claim to have a magic product that will protect your website. And he put up an IP address and said, if anybody can hack in this IP address, I'll pay them $5,000. And there's a file on that server, and I went and scanned it, and all 65,000 ports are closed. So calling that thing a server is kind of a misnomer. It is offering no service at all, so there's nothing to attack. You could just turn it off or pull a plug, and that would be secure in this sense, but it's not offering any service, so that's not what most people care about. But anyway, that's the point. You have to have some open ports, or your server is not doing anything. So there's a bunch of, if you pay for a Windows scanner, you'll get a nice GUI you can click on and such, but you can do it all with Nmap. And there are three possible states of a port: open, closed, and filtered. An open port is one that answers a SYN with a SYN-ACK, and then there's an ACK and you can exchange data. A closed port answers a SYN with reset. This is what the RFCs say that define the Internet Protocol, TCP. If you send a SYN and the server is on and the packet gets there, but it's not listening on that port, then it sends a reset to inform you, I heard your request and your request is denied. I'm not offering any service on that port. But if you get no answer at all, that means a firewall blocked your packet on the way in, which is a good security measure, and they call those filtered ports. Filtered ports are, of course, the most secure because your packet did not even reach the server. And they're also the slowest to scan because packets get lost sometimes. So your scanner, if it sends a SYN and gets no answer, it doesn't really know if that's a filtered port or if it just got lost. So it has to wait for some time to time out and then try again and typically try a third time. So filtered ports slow down the scan. Anyway, some people have tried to say that it's a crime to scan servers, and as far as anybody can tell, you can do Nmap scans on any server and it's legal. If you did it at an extremely high rate, it might possibly bring down the server and count as a denial of service attack. But the author of Nmap, Fyodor, scanned the entire internet many times, and there are now at least 3 or 4 research projects I know that involve scanning the entire internet every day. So for a while, people were getting mad at it and sending angry letters, and now I think they've all just gotten used to it. There are a lot of people scanning you. It's like almost everything in this business, the actual legal status of it is extremely unclear, but we seem to have established a tradition of this being accepted. This is a pretty miserable way to stay out of jail by just sort of guessing what's legal and what isn't, but that's where we are. Anyway, so here's the TCP handshake, and here's how it looks in Wireshark. So you send a SYN up to the server. So here's Wireshark going from my local port of 1461 to remote port of 80, which by default Wireshark will turn into this alphabetic HTTP instead of leaving it as a number, which is irritating, but anyway. Then the server sends back a SYN ACK, and I send an ACK. That's the complete handshake. After that, we relay 2 numbers to count the packets, to count the bytes as we transmit them, and we can now send data both ways until this is closed with a fin or a reset. All right, so a Syn Port Scan is the most common type, and it's also, the Nmap calls it a self-scan. You send a SYN. If you get a SYN ACK, you send a reset. You never complete the handshake. This is because there's no reason to. You've already got the answer you need, and if you don't complete the handshake, you will probably not appear in any server logs, because there are a lot of random packets flying around the internet. A lot of people open their browser on their phone or something and make some connections, and then they close the app or lose the connection. So if you recorded all incomplete handshakes, you'd have a giant list of random junk, and if they never even completed the handshake, they couldn't have sent or received even 1 byte of good data, so they can't have logged in or stolen a password or data or anything. So most logs do not log these, and that's why they call it a self-scan. All right. So that's the SYN scan. There are 3 possible steps. 3 possible states. If the port is closed, you'll get a reset. If the port is open, you'll get a SYN ACK and then send a reset just to end the process. And if the port is filtered, you'll get no reply at all. And you'll just have to wait a few seconds and try again and then say it appears to be filtered. Yeah?
What if you're transmitting over UDP? How's that?
If you transmit over UDP, we'll get there a little later, but actually this is cute. UDP used to be considered useless for scanning because it doesn't have any handshake. If you send UDP packets, you'll get no response. And then finally, about 3 years ago, some brilliant person finally realized what's obvious, which is what you do is you assume UDP services are on the right port and you send a legitimate request. So you send a legitimate DNS request to port 53 and a legitimate other request to each port that you know of, and that way you can at least get a response and you can detect if things are running on the expected ports. So it's a little bit better than nothing. But
like a ping instead?
Yeah, well, ping is another one. You can ping servers, but that's not any port. That's not TCP or UDP. It's a different protocol. But UDP, you can send a packet and you won't get a response unless it's the right kind of request for that service. But if services are running on standard ports, you can send a legitimate request. So now they have a library in Nmap of common UDP requests that it tries, so it detects some information with a UDP scan. Yeah?
What information does it use to guess the operating system?
That's a very cute one. It guesses it from the structure of the packets. And remember last time, the TCP header has a whole bunch of fields and the IP header has a whole bunch of fields, and a bunch of them don't really matter. Like the TTL is the number of hops before you throw away the packet. If the TTL is above 30, you can go around the earth. That's all you need. So I think Windows starts with 128 and Linux starts with 64 or something like that. So you can tell Windows from Linux just in the TTL and the IP layer. And there are a bunch of other fields in the headers that are not used, and different operating systems just arbitrarily fill them with random things. And that's one way to do it. Also, if a service actually answers, it'll give you a banner, and then you can know what's serving there. But it mostly, Nmap works with a fingerprint of the details of the unimportant headers. And it's quite good, and it's, by the way, crowdsourced. I took a vacation a few years ago and stayed in a bunch of hotels. In every hotel I would scan their system, and I found devices, and then I'd find out what they were, and if it weren't on the list, you can actually take a fingerprint with Nmap and send it in to add to their list so it can identify that device in the future. Everybody keeps donating fingerprints to teach Nmap how to recognize everything. Anyway, so the connect scan, if you want to do it as the complete connect, it's the same for a closed or filtered port as a Syn scan, but if you actually do find an open port at Syn Synac ACK, and then reset. It just finishes making the entire connection. There's no particular reason to do this that anybody knows. Some people think it might be a little more accurate, but it is an option in the software. But most of the time, a Syn scan is good enough. And you can do other kinds of scans, like you can do a null scan. Now here is where you reach the different attitudes of companies. A null scan is where you send a packet that has no flag set, not Syn, not ACK, not reset, not anything. Now there is no use for a packet like that. It can't be used to open a connection. It can't, I think, be used to send data. It's just sort of a mistake in the design of the protocol that it is possible to send packets like that. But the request for comments say, if you get one of those, you should send with a reset. So Unix systems that slavishly obey the rules will send a reset. Windows systems will typically ignore it, because Microsoft doesn't really care much about the rules, and since this packet is of no business use, some versions of Windows will answer, other versions won't, and nobody really cares. Because Microsoft never does feel themselves too bound by the rules, although they're a lot more interested in obeying rules lately than they were maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah?
What's the use of this over the earlier systems?
It doesn't have much use, and you almost never use it. It won't tell you what TCP ports are open. The only reason you might use something like this is because you are trying to get through some exotic firewall by sending strange packets that it won't catch. Yeah, it's not very commonly used. There's also an Xmas scan where you just turn on fin, push, and urgent, and it's like the null scan. It doesn't make any sense. Some systems will reply, a lot of systems will just ignore it. And you can send a fin scan, and you're supposed to get a reset, even if there is no open connection. These are other options, but they're all very rarely used. Normally, you just do a Syn scan. Anyway, all these three don't work very well on Windows machines. Some versions of Windows will show the port open. Other versions of Windows will show the port closed. You don't get clear answers because Windows is not consistent at treating traffic that is of no commercial value. They're here to make money. They don't really care how you handle the stupid traffic that doesn't matter. All right. And of course, the old standard, maybe 15 years ago, was to use ping scans. You'd send pings to machines to find out if they're there. That's what it was intended for. But that became the standard way to find targets and attack them. So ever since Windows XP Service Pack 2, Microsoft Windows products no longer answer pings. So the only thing you'll see is the Unix and Mac machines, Linux and Macs, and you'll see Windows machines that have turned off their firewall, but the firewall's on by default, and most Windows users just use the default settings. Yeah?
When you're doing this, is the server that's answering this capturing the session ID?
No, there's no session. A ping is a very simple packet. It just is a request for an echo, and an echo comes back.
How about the port scans? Because you're doing
A port scan is, you're doing Syn, Synac, ACK, and up to there you don't send any data. It's only after that you would then send, it would send you a statement saying please log in, if it was something like an FTP server, and then you'd send a name and password. So all that would come later. So none of these scans actually get to the point of creating a session.
Because this is before any socket is set
Right.
up.
The TCP Handshake creates a socket. If you actually do Syn, Synac, ACK, now you have a socket. But you terminate it before you send any, receive any data. So that's why all these, none of that therefore does create what you could call a socket. And that's a session of a certain sort.
Is the session ever recorded? If you pass data, that's recorded, right?
Well, they could configure the logging to log anything, but normally you wouldn't log anything until after they actually log in. Like a failed login attempt might be recorded and a successful login attempt, but here you don't even get far enough to get the banner. Although usually you will receive the banner actually after that. And Nmap has a version scan that will deliberately fetch the banners to try to identify the services, and that might possibly be recorded. But usually not, because you don't even go to the login. And normally you don't record anything until a successful login or a failed login. If you hang up before you even try to log in, it's not common to record that. If you did, you'd have a bunch of junk to filter through. Yeah?
So isn't there a way to block this on your network?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You can use a firewall or an IDS, and you can block any kind of traffic you want. For example, you should block all traffic on ports you're not using. And you can also, an IDS can detect Nmap. like the same IP is probing a lot of ports, that doesn't look right, and kick them off if they do that. You can totally do that, and some people do. And Nmap has options to be sneakier. You can make it do the ports in a random order and do them slower to try to look more innocent. And if you do it over Tor, they'll appear to come from all these different IP addresses. So they'd be harder for them to detect you and stop you. But they certainly do try to detect common scanning tools and block them. All right, so there's also an ACK scan. This one has a little bit of use. And this is probably worth making a note of. If you send, TCP has a feature called flow control built into it. So if I send a request to Google that I want to see my email, and then Google wants to send me a bunch of email, it starts sending me packets. Now I could have a slow machine that can't process them as fast as Google servers can deliver them. So what happens is it will only send me a certain amount of data, which is defined by the window size and typically starts at 8,000 bytes. It'll send me 8,000 bytes of data, and then it will stop until I send an acknowledgement. So the client controls it. It won't send any more until I acknowledge it. And therefore, if I'm sending data one way, like I'm downloading a movie, data is coming this way, and every few packets I send an ACK, and there goes more data, and then an ACK. So there's a steady stream of ACKs going the other way every time TCP is moving data. Data comes this way, ACKs go that way. So every network has a ton of ACKs flying through. Now, if you have a old-fashioned stateless firewall, which doesn't have any memory, then it has to just let all the ACKs through, because for all it knows, the ACKs are part of a data transfer in progress. So ACKs will typically go through firewalls, whereas things like SYNs would be blocked. And so that's why you can sometimes probe beyond firewalls with ACKs. This is only true if they're very stupid firewalls. The Windows firewall is now stateful. It remembers the history, so it doesn't let all the ACKs through. It only lets the ACKs through that have to do with connections that are established. And most modern layer 7 firewalls are also that smart. So only the dumber firewalls would be fooled by this, but it's an option. And like I say, UDP is an option. The Nmap UDP scan will just try to send valid UDP requests to known UDP services, and it will find things that are normal services running on a normal port. By the way, one common thing that people do for security is move something to the wrong port. Like SSH, if you open SSH on port 22, TCP, you will immediately get slow brute force attacks. There are a bunch of bots out there that scan the entire internet to try to break into SSH servers. And you can just set up a honeypot and record this. It's quite easy. You can set up something like HoneyD and listen and see what they try. And they try a very strange bunch of passwords, weird stuff you'd never think of. Not like the top 10 passwords. But anyway, apparently it works. As soon as you open the port, you get these people guessing passwords. And if you don't want that happening, just move it to some other port than 22, and it won't happen because the bots aren't searching out there. Yeah?
Where on your machine can you configure the buffering? Like you're saying, like, like
the buffering? You mean
the
the
buffering, also the sync,
the window size?
Can you control that through your machine?
If you have a Linux machine, you can control it. That's why, and you do a project here. There's a project where you do a manual TCP handshake in this class. Let me point it out, because that's where you're going to play with this. All right, that's down here. Introduction, TCP Handshake with Scapy. So this is probably one that's going to get you here, and we'll talk a little more about this later. But here you make your own handshake, and in order to do this, you have to have 2 Linux machines. Make another copy of Corley. Windows would let you adjust this in the days of Windows XP, but when they rewrote their network stack to include IP version 6 to handle things differently, you could no longer adjust it. You are stuck with fixed times, and there's no registry key or anything to adjust them. And it's pretty short, so you would go nuts. But here you get 2 Linux machines, and what happens here is you can see that the time you can watch, and it will drop a connection pretty fast, and you can adjust the time, which is here. You watch the TCP, you can just watch a connection, time out on you, and you can lengthen it with this. Put 10, in this number measures the time it waits for retries, and you can increase it to where it will wait like 5 minutes to do a handshake, which is better if you're doing it by hand and trying to learn about it, but of course it means you'd have a slight number of increased spurious connections.
If you adjust this, can you speed up your upload?
You could, probably not. What you could do is have more parallel streams. You can adjust that. And you can even do that on Windows, at least you used to be able to. That's what BitTorrent does, have many parallel streams of data. But changing the timing on your machine usually won't help that much, because the thing that kills you is latency, going through the cables from here to there. They were just talking about this at the Cloudflare conference they came from. They were talking about why some people have lousy internet, and like in Australia, the internet is pretty miserable. And Australians come here and they say, boy, it's a whole lot nicer, because they're using American services. and you can't beat the speed of light. The problem is it takes 80 or 100 milliseconds to get here from Australia, and we're not going to do anything about that anytime soon because that's the speed of light. So you have to wait like a long time for everything to happen. What you could do, by the way, is switch to a protocol that doesn't have this handshake thing. Like when they wanted to talk about space missions and putting satellites around Jupiter and stuff, they developed a new system to replace TCP called DTN, Delay Tolerant Networking, where you don't ever send something and wait for an answer because that'll be 4 hours. So this is no good. So whatever you got, wrap it up like an email and send it all in one package. And then maybe you find out later if it got there, but nobody is waiting for some handshake or something because it'll never, that's going to be terrible in such an environment. And you can switch to something like that. Anyway, so those are good. And I got a few iClicker questions. Come grab one if you need one. And I will see if my app is going to work, theoretically. I have moved the app and all the configurations to this machine, but we'll see if that is really true. English, that would be good. New session. Reef polling. I don't know what that is. Oh, good. It looks like it might work. Let's see if somebody try voting, please. Press a button, eh? Oh, good. It works. All right, good. That makes me feel good. Okay. So, good. My backup system is still good enough. All right. All right. So, there it goes. All right, if you send a SYN and you get no response at all, what state is the target port in? All right, I'll quit at 30. All right, that's filtered. The packet never got there. The most popular answer, wait a minute, the most popular answer is correct, filtered, good. Not closed, because a closed would answer with a reset. You know, filtered means it's not obeying the rules. You should answer every packet that comes in. That's in the protocol, in the rules. If you get no answer to a SYN, then something is breaking the rules, and that's what firewalls do. They break connections so the server never sees it. All right. All right, what kind of scan is that? There. All right, I'll quit at 30. All right, that's a connect scan because it made the full connection before sending a reset, so it's not a SYN scan, it's a connect scan. And by the way, is this port open or closed?
Open.
It's open. If it was, so you set the SYN ACK, and then you set an ACK and then a reset, that's a connect scan. All right. And what kind of scan is that? All right, I'll quit at 30. All right, that is a null scan. You see, this is not a SYN or an ACK or anything. So good, everyone knows that. All right. All right, that's the whole packet sequence. So what state is port 4 in? Quit at 30. All right. The right answer is D, not the most popular answer. That is a null scan. If that was a SYN, you could say that port was filtered. But it's a null scan, so you're getting no information from it. Windows machines might not answer even if it gets there, whether they're open or closed. You don't know. If you knew it was a Linux machine and you sent this, then you would say that port is either open or filtered, because you didn't get a reply, and you would have got a reset if it was closed. But if you don't even know whether it's Linux or Windows, then you can't say anything. It could be any of these three states, depending on the version of Windows, because null packets aren't very useful. Anyway, all right, so let's take a break. It's 10 minutes to 7. Let's continue at 7. Give you a few minutes, and I'll save this part of the recording. 123, Chapter 5.
There's a guest speaker on Monday?
Well, I don't.